So I'm here with Anna and Davy. Hello to both of you.
Hello.
We're going to talk briefly about a poem by Angela Carr called Of the Still Middle. And it was anthologized in a book called I'll Drown My Book, subtitled Conceptual Writing by Women. It was chosen to be in this book of conceptual writing. And I'll read it and we'll talk about it. Still in the what happens middle of never. Still in the what middle happens of never. Still in the middle what happens of never. Still in the middle what of happens never. Still in the middle of what happens never. Still in the middle of what never happens. In still the middle of what never happens. In the still middle of what never happens. In the still of middle what never happens. In the of still middle what never happens. In of the still middle what never happens. Of in the still middle what never happens. What's going on there, Davy?
It's a very cool sonnet.
It's a sonnet.
It's 12 lines with these 2 gaps, which I read as lines.
Is it a sestet and an octet?
Well,
2,
it
4, 6,
would
no.
be if it had its other lines.
Okay, so what advantage gets derived by your mentioning that it's a sonnet?
Of being able to think about how sonnets use time, and so thinking about a thing that kind of looks on the page like a sonnet, but is thinking about stuckness and is thinking about modes of processing and thinking of both what has happened in the past and being, as the middle line says, still in the middle of what never happens, of being embedded in something that doesn't habitually occur, but is still taking you out of what it is you're interested in thinking about.
Wow. Anna?
I read that middle line, still in the middle of what never happens, as the kind of like line.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we started.
Yeah.
Even though it's in the middle.
Right. From which all of the other lines are
variations.
Variated, permutated and scrambled. And
Mm-hmm.
and that means it's really cool because it performs then its own stillness and middleness.
We tend to like poems that do what they say.
We do.
Right. So
We do.
Mm-hmm.
I think we do.
Yeah, we do.
Admire them.
Just checking.
It's pretty. Poetry is one of those things that can do what it says.
Yeah.
By what it says, I mean content.
Right.
Okay. So how does this poem do what it says?
This poem refuses having a relationship to content to keep you in the middle while you're reading the poem of a procedure of deferral. That you're deferring having an experience of content to enact the conceptual project of being in the middle of something that is never going to happen because once the poem's over, the poem's over.
Anna, can you say it any better than that?
I certainly cannot. I can only admire a poem that really performs the process of keeping us from going, right, in the Cormanian sense.
To detain us.
We are detained.
We are in the middle.
We're kept from going. We're in the middle. We're not going anywhere because the poem itself is not going anywhere.
Yeah.
We're just invited to think about all of the incredible variations are possible still in the middle of what never happens.
Yeah. Okay, so still permutates. Still is one of those English words that does a lot of work.
Mm.
Still meaning in an ongoing sense. Still meaning not going,
Right.
but stilled. And then we get in the still, in still, in the still, in the still, in the of still, in of the still, of in the still. So still starts being not motion and ends up being motion. Okay, but what happens and what never happens? Let's talk about that phrase. Because, I don't know, novels have to have stuff that happens, and TV shows generally do, but poems don't have to. So what is all this about what happens?
This is a poem that's making me think a lot about the procedures of activist practice, which require you to be in the middle of forms of change, of forms of radical change, of the overthrow of capital, let's say, that does not have a historical precedent, but you have to be in the middle of imagining that reality in order to be doing that work. And I think that this is a book of conceptual writing by women. This is interested in thinking about reframing some dominant narratives of conceptual poetry and imagining what it would look like to imagine otherwise in the space of the poem.
Nice. Anna, final thought.
I can't improve on that. I'm just really happy to be invited to sit still with this poem for a while.
Well, my final thought is I see this as partly a riff against Auden's ridiculous notion that poems are things that never make nothing happen. Mm-hmm. I think the never happenness and the stillness of this poem is a very dynamic poem, and yet it's sort of teasing us with this idea that it's so non-narrative that nothing ever happens. There's so much of an insistence on what never happens. And the last 6 lines, what never happens, 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 what never happens. Well, a lot's happening. And not only that, here we have a sonnet, and the rhyming of the sonnet is A, B, 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 B. There's a sonnet where nothing happens. Thank you so much, both of you. This was great.
Thanks.
If you liked this episode, watch another and subscribe.
And join us for ModPo, a free and open course at modpo.org.